just going to start now. Okay, great. So introductions. My name is Mat Pullen. I'm an Apple professional learning specialist working alongside JTRS today around the idea of app design, but also in lots of other sessions where we will work specifically with schools on their training needs as well. On the focus of today, this is what we're going to be looking at in terms of app design, but we just wanted to take a moment to kind of discuss with you just some of the other things that JTRS offer as part of their models to support schools and education. The JTRS Class Act subscription is a really easy and affordable way for you to stay current and sustainable with your devices. We know that a flexible iPad solution can really help different schools make sure they build on those devices that they've invested in. Now, you can have a flexible solution for just $6.99 a month, but you can also build your own Class Act design, including ongoing teacher training, MDM licenses, technical support, insurance, and a whole range of things. So please do contact JTRS for any more information around that. And also, we wanted to highlight another thing that JTRS work around, which is this Apple Learning Institute. It's a series of high quality professional online events that show you how to effectively use technology in the classroom. It is virtual, it's a multi-day experience, and it's aimed at your SLT and educators that play an important role in terms of the strategy within the school. Once you complete it, your leaders will become Apple Learning Leaders. So a great way to kind of certify the role that people play within the school. Now, at the moment, JTRS are the only Apple partner in the whole of Europe that can offer this. So again, it's quite a prestigious thing for you to be part of. So again, please contact JTRS in the chat window or directly to find out any more information. Talking about the session that we're doing today, I mentioned this at the start. JTRS are building this fantastic resource called Learning Inspired, which is a real place for teacher resources to all be kept in one space. So it can support teachers, educational leaders, technical teams to just access anything, broken down into 4 sections. So we've got the teacher resources, where you'll find blogs on different things around the use of technology in a classroom. A lot more content will be added there across the year and into 2022. The distance learning section, which will help you learn in times that you need to access those things. Success stories, which is always great to hear from how other schools have implemented technology in their situation and learn from each other and build up those connections. And then finally, I suppose what we're doing today, events and webinars. So a place where you can find out where future events and webinars are going to be, but equally these sessions will be recorded and you can access those on demand when you feel you need to access those things. So do keep an eye out on the website for those bits of information. And then we also wanted to just highlight some of the other things. Jamf has a webinar coming up on the 4th of November. If you're not aware of Jamf, Jamf is an MDM that sits behind the scenes to make sure that all of your devices work. This is a great opportunity to kind of find out a little bit more about how Jamf works, how it can be used to manage your iPad setup. It's a free webinar, so again, please do ask questions in the session around how you can access this, and there are people on the chat window that can point you in the right direction. And the final thing to highlight is this is Coding Week. We're doing this because of Coding Week, and JTRS have got some fantastic additional support that can be offered to you around STEM development. And using the code JTRS-STEM10, you can get 10% off of any STEM related resources with JTRS. So again, please do speak to JTRS about how they can support teachers in implementing STEM technologies into any of your lessons. And you'll see on the screen there the range of different activities, tools and things that can be really great at enhancing how you use that in the classroom. Okay, so onto the purpose of today's session. And we're here to look at how we can introduce this idea of app design into the curriculum. And when we look at this, we're not specifically looking at coding. We're looking at how we can utilize the idea of something which is coded in the fact of apps, something which everyone's very, very familiar with, and how you can use that as a structure for learning in your classroom in multiple subject areas to get students to understand the idea of computational thinking, to understand the idea of the basics of coding, but in a very fun and creative way. Now, when we look at this, there's not just a simple setup. The journey of creating anything doesn't just involve the creation element. And in fact, you'll notice here the prototyping is the fourth stage. And what Apple have done and what we're going to introduce to you today is this app design journey that you can utilize with your students to get them to understand the process of anything in terms of design, creativity, evaluation, and reiteration of any of those things. And you'll notice on here, we have 5 stages. We have that initial introduction, brainstorming that we can utilize to think about why are we creating these things. The planning stage where you can think about what is it that we want to create, what might it look like. Prototyping, when we actually get to build things, and we're actually going to spend quite a lot of time in today's session looking at this. So if you do have an iPad to hand and you have a Keynote app, it'll be great to have some hands-on activity with this. And then finally, possibly the most important part of any design element is the evaluation. Did it work? Did it meet the needs that we set out at the very start? And Apple has also created a fantastic resource to go alongside this that helps you and helps your learners document the whole process. And this booklet can be downloaded. It structures learning for your students and also gives them a place to evidence everything they've done, giving you a really, really nice place to make sure that students understand that process of design, evaluation, etc. And we know that giving students a blank page for any creativity is a real challenge. So what this does nicely is it just helps you scaffold this. And like I said, doubles as a great source for their completed work to showcase at a later date if they want to share this with peers or the teacher or wider than that in a wider community. So let's take a look at this in the first instance. And like I said, if you've got any questions as we go through this, please don't hesitate to jump in the chat window and ask away. So I'm going to go into this Apple Teacher guide. If you're not aware of Apple Teacher, if you've not seen Apple Teacher before, Apple Teacher is a program which is created by Apple to support teachers in their use of technology in the classroom. You'll notice at the top here, it's simply search for appleteacher.com. If I just go back to the main page, sorry, appleteacher.apple.com. And when you first go into it, you'll notice there's a whole range of tools on this page which can help you in your understanding of the utilization of technology in your classroom. There are elements that you can go through to get yourself badged, but there are also these great learning examples across the top here. You'll see that there's things around portfolio, but what we're going to focus on today is this section around inclusive app design. So if I tap into this, this is where we start to see the whole lesson planning examples that we can utilize with our students. Let me just make sure I've got this front and center for you. Now, it gives a bit of an introduction that you can use with your students to just get them to understand how to use this. You'll notice that this is an hour-long session. Obviously, you as teachers can expand this and utilize this as part of your learning, or use it as this one standalone 1-hour session. And there are 2 types of activities or workbooks that you can use depending on the age of your learners. You'll notice that this one here, Everyone Can Code App Design Journal, aims for 5 to 9-year-olds, which would be this booklet here. But there's also one which works for older students from year 10 and upwards, which is in this one. It's the same content, but a little bit higher in terms of the level of ability. And it can also then extend them to even going on to actually creating their own applications in a coding environment. So you can download the booklet here, and I'm going to go through this with everybody in just a moment. Now you'll notice that example here that I used on my slide earlier of the pace of a lesson, the introduction, brainstorming those activities, planning what you're going to do, prototyping and making it, and then finally sharing it and thinking about what you can do to improve, getting feedback from peers, etc. Now, from a teacher point of view, you have all of the activities set out for you. This is your lesson plan, including resources that you might want to use in order to introduce this to your students. And it's broken down really, really nicely to get you to think about how you would put this to your students. You'll notice that there are examples of activities that you can do, but equally, if you have younger learners, it gives you examples of what you might do to simplify or extend those students to go even further with their learning. In this case, the introduction just talks about what makes a good app, and it thinks about who is your app aimed at. We talk about these in terms of your axes of diversity. So is it aimed at a specific age? Are you thinking about the disabilities or the language of the people that would utilize your app? So that in itself is a great way to introduce the concepts of accessibility to students. When we think about designing anything, who are we designing it for? And how do we make sure everybody has access to these things? We then move on to the next stage, which is brainstorming. Something that we do a lot with our students in the classroom. We ask them to think about the purpose of what we do. And this is just an opportunity for your students to think about who would they want to make an app for. Now, you can preempt this. It could be that you're doing a topic on something around diversity, equality, climate change. You can actually then give them that as the initial topic and then make them subcategorize those things. But the focus here is students have a purpose for what they're creating. Once they've done this brainstorming activity, then they can start to think about who this applies to. So am I making a climate change application to make sure people are aware of the things in the world? But am I making it for children or am I making it for adults? Am I making it for people in this country or am I making it for people around the world? Because obviously different people will have different ways to access those things. And again, if you need to explore more, the plus gives you opportunities to think about other ways that you can utilize this, from simplifying those activities to extending those actions for those students to use. So lots of content in here. The next stage then is to plan, and this is when students can start to get creative. And this is great because we know that students are aware of apps. They're around us in everything we do these days. So get them to have a look at some of the apps that they like to use. What is it that's functional about those apps? How are they designed? And that reflective process is a great way to develop their critical thinking skills, as well as understanding who could this app be used for. So again, some key questions on here that you can just pose in the classroom that get students to think differently, including the idea of accessibility. How are you going to make sure that anybody would be able to use your application regardless of their needs? And again, we have the Explore More section, giving you ways to extend and simplify. And then the next section is to prototype. This is the bit that's really hands-on. This is the opportunity for students to be able to actually start to build their applications. Now, we're not talking full-blown coding. We're talking about just a prototype of an app, which has function. It will still work to some extent like an application, but it's kind of more the prototype, the process of what might it look like. So again, students get the chance to be problem solvers, to be creators, to think differently about how they're creating the things. And all of this is wrapped up in the book itself, which shows students how to actually go through this design build process. And we're actually going to do this prototyping bit as a group altogether. So I will walk people through this part of the section. And then the final thing, probably, like I said, the most important thing, is sharing and getting feedback on what you've done. Because we know that any journey doesn't end when you get to the end point, because at that point you reflect on what you've done and then you might make things better. And this is a great way for students to start to think about learning from mistakes, learning from failures, that it's okay because it actually gives us a point of learning to reflect on what we've done and do things differently. So again, some key questions that you can use and some explore more sections where you can simplify or extend. So let's take a look at the document itself. I'm just going to grab this up on the screen. And like I said, if you've got any questions, please do fire away. Let me just grab the document that we're going to be working on. So this is the booklet itself. Like I said, this is a free download for you to get hold of. You'll notice again that it's broken down into those different sections in terms of how you want to use this with your students. So we have the brainstorm, plan, prototype, and then the evaluate section. And like I said, this is a great way for students to be able to just scaffold the learning. Now you can adapt this for your students. So if you know that any of the text needs to change to make it more specific to what your students are doing, you can edit all of this before sharing this with your learners. Each section builds on the different elements. You'll notice here, having students understand what the problem is or challenge. So what do they want to add into this section? Thinking about their favorite apps, the purpose of what they want to actually create. And then start to think about the audience. Who is this for? Who is the person that would utilize the device? And then what will the app actually do? So how does it work? And what are those sorts of elements within the app? And again, like you see here, you might choose to change some of this, delete some of these out, or extend them even further with some additional content. Now, this is a great way, like I said, to take away the blank page idea for students and give them scaffold to think about the process of design. The same works in the second section when it comes to planning. It talks about some of the language, which is coding type language, UI and UX, in terms of thinking about what does that mean, so user experience, etc., and how would they interact with those things. Get them to think about some of the key features of devices. So how would they input? Again, keyboard for a laptop, but then thinking about a mobile device, and maybe it's got a camera, maybe it's got the microphone, maybe it's got a touch screen. So how would you utilize those things? So you'll see how this starts to get students to think about input and output devices, etc., which will correspond to their use of the coding curriculum. That then goes through to the prototyping. Again, examples here of how students would use this as a storyboard type element. Thinking about function and how those things interact, that non-linear approach to design. So if I tap this button, where would it go to? And what's great is there are some examples added in here of what this could look like. So if I just tap on this and play the video for a second, this is what students can create in an application using Keynote just as an app prototype, but starting to think about what their app would actually look like and have something as a playable, usable tool. And then, like we said, the opportunity to evaluate what they've done. Some key questions to think about when they're surveying their friends or the teachers that have used this, like, did it work? What was confusing about it? What could we do differently? And what's nice is it goes back to that initial page again to get you to think about that reiteration. Now I've got that feedback. What could I do differently this time? So again, learning from those mistakes, learning from that feedback and thinking what that could look like going forward. So that's the booklet. That's how it can kind of wrap up for you. And that's the stages. Let's have a look at what that actually looks like for a student to do any of these things. And for this, I'm going to jump onto my iPad because we're going to actually have a go at building this. So take a moment if you've got your iPad handy to just get that fired up. And I'm just going to change my screen to my iPad screen. Okay. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my device. If you just, Adam, if you just want to give me a thumbs up to make sure that's coming through and everyone can see that on the screen. Okay. Cross that's through. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I'm just on my iPad now. What we're going to look at here is the prototyping section. Hopefully you'll agree that the process of brainstorming is quite straightforward and that the process is there and actually really well documented, both within the Apple Teacher website talking about introduction and brainstorming, but also the booklet to help scaffold that. The next thing is really the nuts and bolts of like, how do you actually make this work? So I'm going to use the Keynote app to prototype this. Now, again, Keynote, for those of you that are unfamiliar, is a presentation tool. Some people liken it to PowerPoint or Google Slides, but we can do so much more with it when we think creatively in its use. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the app. And then one thing to just highlight here is we want to create an app. You'll see here's the example that Apple showed before. And the way that this has been created is start thinking about the slide as the application window. So you'll see that the slide dimensions have changed, and we'll go through that in a second. But fundamentally, it's a presentation that has a non-linear approach to it. And you'll notice the hyperlinks on the page here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one of these ourselves. So if I go back to the presentations, I'm going to start a blank presentation. It's going to ask me to choose a theme. Now, again, those familiar with presentation tools, you'll know that there's lots of different themes that you can choose from. In this instance, though, I'm just going to choose a blank white setup because I'm going to be changing everything within this anyway. I'm also now just going to delete all of the text on the page just by tapping on the text and then tapping on delete. And so now I've just got a blank canvas. Now, the next thing we need to do here is change the dimensions of the page. I could create an app that is kind of in this landscape view, but let's make it look more realistic for the students. So to do that, if I tap on the more, the 3 dots, and then go down to document setup, at the bottom, I can change the slide size, and I can make this a custom size. Now here I can change the width and the height dimensions. So we're going to change this to 375 by 812. So I'll just leave that on the page just for a second so people can see that. And when I tap go, you'll see that that's now changed my slide dimensions to something more in keeping with a phone device. And you could also do this if you wanted this to be an iPad or whatever. Think about the dimensions. What would that look like for the students? And when I tap done, my main page back here has that same look, and I can see my phone screen as the Keynote slide. And now if I tap on the plus, you'll notice that any additional slides that I add in have already been formatted to that. So just to go over that again, change the format, change the screen size. 375 by 812 gives you this kind of iPhone look on your screen. And then what we're going to do is start designing. So for those people that are new to Keynote, just a quick overview. We have 2 main function buttons at the top that we're going to be utilizing as part of this design. And this is what makes it really, really handy for students because they're not bogged down with complex controls. If I want to add anything, I tap on the plus button. It gives me a range of things that I can add in, multimedia things, shapes, etc., and then graphs and charts if you want to add those into your design. Within the shapes, you have the basic shapes, but you'll notice at the top, there's also a whole range of different shapes that you can utilize that you can simply just drag into your design. So depending on your comfort levels in terms of design, you can either start and do this all from scratch yourself, or for younger learners, they might utilize some of these shapes to help build their application. Like I said, you can also add in multimedia as well. So you'll see on here the ability to add in photos or video that you've previously taken. You could take live photos or videos just by accessing the camera. A great feature is being able to add in your own voice or record audio into this presentation or app. And then also other ways that you can add things such as drawing, or using video clips from things like YouTube or Vimeo as well. Let's have a look at some of the basic functions of how we get an app to work. So again, I'll go through this, I'll pause, and if people have any questions, please do shout out. So let's design a first page. I'm just going to tap on the shapes button here. And I'm just going to find some very, very simple shapes to start with. I'm just going to start with a circle in the middle of my page. I'm going to tap on the format button, which allows me to change whatever object I've selected. I'm going to turn this button green. And I'm going to type go in the box. So I'm starting to create a button on my page, and the button will ultimately do something. But just imagine this now as the first thing that you would see if you opened my app. So just take a moment to just add that in. Okay, so the next thing that I would have designed in that whole prototyping elements, the building, the planning, is what pages do I need to create? And if we go back to that document again, this is built in this section here where you get the students to think about the design and you get them to think about the flow. So this would be page 1. What happens if I click on this button? Which page does it need to go through? So students would have this to build off, the whole idea of having their storyboard. So this is exactly what we do here. If I add in a second page, I'm just going to choose a blank page at the bottom, but I could change any of these as design pages if I wanted to have one with images and text, etc. But I'm just going to choose a blank one just to show you the function of this and how this works. So this page now may well be the page which is the menu page. So on here, I think I'll just do this in terms of, let's imagine we're doing an app about clothes. So let's just use some of those shapes and put some clothing on the page. Again, I can imagine that you're thinking there, how would I use this for history? How could I use this for art? How could I use this for language development? It really is the house and how you are connecting all of the learning. So in order for students to have content, the learning comes in that part of the delivery in a lesson. So I've done this before with history apps where you've taught students about different types of history. It might be the Romans, etc. And then you could make an app for those students, or the students make the app, sorry, to demonstrate their knowledge, where each one of these becomes a button to talk about how the Romans lived, what the Romans ate, what did they do, what was their system for buying things, what was their money like, what was war like, all of those sorts of things. So it just becomes a placeholder really for that content, but it just becomes more interactive than maybe just writing this in a book or making a presentation. Plus they're also learning those coding skills, which is really, really important going forward as well. So again, you don't need to do this about clothes. If you don't want to, you can do this about anything you want. You can add those in. You can even just do this as just simple buttons at the moment, if you like. So I'm just going to add in just a few different types of clothing. So that's my menu page. And again, I can play around with this and change the format and style, colors of those different elements if I want to make it look a lot nicer. And given more time, you can imagine students would, really go to town on thinking about their design and what they want their pages to look like, etc. I'll just add in some elements here. There we go. So again, hopefully everyone's just playing along at the moment. So we've got our page 1, which is our landing page, our page 2, which is our menu page. And I've got 6 buttons that I've created on this page. So I'm going to need 6 pages for that to go to. So I'm just going to tap on the plus, just add in 6 blank pages. And again, you don't need to do all of this in one go. You could just add 1 page for the moment, but I just need to show you the whole process of what the app would look like and how that to and fro would work. I'll just have multiple pages on the screen. There we go. So there's my 6 pages that will ultimately link to this page. Okay. Now, the next thing I need to do then is think about what's going to go on the page. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of a shortcut here. Again, with your students, there's so much design that they could do, but visually, so that you can see how this works, I'm just going to copy the icon from each page onto the page so you can see how this marries up in terms of slide 2 and slide 3 and slide 4, etc. So I'm just going to copy these across, just so visually you can see what this actually looks like as I start to do the next stage, which is how do we navigate around these different elements. And again, Hopefully at this point, everyone's playing along. And I'm trying to keep an eye on the questions. I haven't seen any come up just yet. Hopefully that means everybody is following well and having a play along at the same time. Okay. So hopefully you can see now kind of the structure of this page is what we would do with students, get them to think about the structure of how they're building this application. Now I've taken a shortcut today, obviously, because I haven't done the whole design process. I'm doing that as I'm building at the moment, but students would just be building this based on the design that they've got within that prototype book. So the next thing here is to think about the function. So at the moment, I have a linear presentation. Thinking about this as a presentation tool, it would go from slide 1 to slide 2 to slide 3, etc. However, in an application, you would need to have navigation, so it's not a linear thing. So i.e., if I wanted to go to jumpers, for example, if I tap on jumpers, it should take me to slide 4. So let's build that in now. If I tap on that icon itself, you'll see that it gives me some additional options on the screen. If you can't see all of the options, if you just tap on the arrow to the side, it will give you some additional ones. And in this case, I'm going to tap on link. And by tapping on link, it gives me a place that I can input this hyperlink. I can link to various things, web pages, emails, phone numbers, or different places within the slide. Now, it's useful for students to know this because actually within their app, they might want to link out to another web page, or it might be a contact button where they would say, you know, tap on this and it will open up the email on your device. In this case, though, let's look at the simple thing of just navigating this non-linear presentation. So I'm going to choose slide, and I need to change this to link to slide number 4, which is why I've put the jumper on there so that you can see how this is working. And then I can repeat that process for all of the other items. So the t-shirt is going to link to slide 3. The trousers are going to link to slide 5. And again, within this, you've got students starting to think about the computational thinking, cause and effect of what they're doing. If you do this, what is the result of that? So I'll just make sure I've got all of these put in place. Oops. There we go. Should be all of them now. So now I have a hyperlink which takes me to each one of the pages. So again, just take a moment to just go through that, and then perhaps just a thumbs up in the with using the emojis just to know that you're ready to move on to the next stage. You don't need to do it for all of the shapes that you've put in there, by the way, just as long as you understand where the button is to push, etc., so that you could do this with your students in the classroom. Great, thank you very much. So I've got some thumbs up there. Now I'm going to add one more because I've realized that I've got my first page, and then how do I get to my second page? So I'm actually going to do that on this button as well, just so I've got a functioning app. I'm just going to link this, is always just going to link to slide number 2. Now this is the part of a session which is great with your students to start to get them to think about the process. And again, the computational thinking, like how would this work? Because at the moment, if I play this as an app, you see it looks like a functioning app on the screen. If I tap on the red jumper, it takes me to the red jumper page, which could be, you know, information about the color red, or it could be information about jumpers, or it could be a sales app, or whatever it might be. I'm now stuck. Like, how do I get back a page? What if I push the wrong button? So there's a great problem-solving element in this for students to think about that computational thinking. How does an app actually function? And then hopefully they'll go back to this in terms of their brainstorming and their planning to think about what apps they use and how do those apps function. So the next thing that we need to actually add in here is a home button, because we know that every page, you know, anywhere, to make it accessible needs to have a way to get back to the start. So I'm going to design one in a very, very simple way. If I tap, again, I'm in the plus, I'm in the shapes. I'm just going to search for a home button. And I'm going to add that to the page. I'm going to make it fairly discreet, but place it up in the top corner, because again, students will have thought about like, where do you tend to see those buttons? Because lots of research would have been done into that, like where do we automatically look if we're trying to exit something? And again, I need to do the same process here of linking this. And this is always going to link back to slide 2. That's my menu page. So that's where I'm going to decide is home. And what you can do here to speed up the process, if I copy that, I can simply now paste this on every other slide. And it's going to copy across that hyperlink as well, which means I don't have to design that each time. I don't have to input that. That automatically picks up the idea that that shape will link back to slide 2, wherever it is on the document. So again, just take a moment to just create that, and then I'll show you what we've created so far. Again, feel free just to do a thumbs up when you've got those things working. Brilliant. Great, so I'm going to play mine now. So let's imagine this was my application. If I tap on the Go button, it's going to take me through to my main menu. If I tap on the pink trousers, it takes me to the pink trouser page. If I now tap on the Home button, it takes me back to my menu. And now I've got this non-linear application where I can jump between the pages exactly as you would if this was a functioning app. So students now have the basic model of an application on their device that they can utilize to then build even more content. Now, this is, I suppose, is probably the very basic model, because now you've got this, students can add in whatever they want onto each additional page. So thinking back to those additional things here, do they want to add in information in the form of text, videos, web videos, drawings, etc.? Because everything is possible to build onto this page. So take one of your pages for a second and just have a look at some of the different things that you can add into it. In terms of just adding in photos or videos from your device, recording yourself using the camera or recording things around you, recording your audio, which is a great way to bring that extra level of information to a page, specifically for younger learners or students that might have that as an accessibility need, be it that their English is an additional language or anything else. And also have a play around with drawing, because drawing makes it even easier to just add in that personal content to your page. You might have students that want to draw all of the elements directly on the page. Remember, this is only a prototype, so it doesn't have to look like the perfect finished model. This is just how would this app look for the end user. So just take a couple of minutes to just have a play around with some of those different functions on the page. And then we're going to pause for a second, and I'm going to ask people to just share some of their initial thoughts of how you might use this in your curriculum areas, depending on the age you teach, as well as the subjects that you might teach. And feel free to just drop some of those thoughts into the chat window. Okay, loads of budding app developers in the process here. Brilliant, thanks for that. Yeah, so teacher of Key Stage 3 ICT, complementing, and that's a great term there, right? This is not about get rid of what you currently do, it's complementing what you currently do. And I think that's really, really good. So yes, thinking about the computational thinking process, how could you make something? And again, you know, that could lead on to Key Stage 4, where they might actually do some full-on coding and app building and those sorts of things down the line. This is something which I suppose is accessible to everyone, and we'll talk about accessibility again in a second as well. So yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Sanderson. Again, keep going with those thoughts as people are kind of, I know people, I've asked people to make and then share ideas at the same time, but keep sharing those thoughts. It's always good to kind of share that as a community. I wanted to jump back to this prototype one. This is the example that you get. Now, depending on the age that you're teaching, this might be overwhelming for some of your students, but equally never underestimate the things that they can do. I've done this as an activity with children as young as 6 years old. And yes, some of their apps look quite basic, but they understand the process. And that's kind of the key thing that we're doing with this. If I play this as an app now, you'll see it looks fundamentally the same as the one I did. But what we've added into this is those elements of animation, which kind of take it to a next level. So on this, if I tap on the Get Started, I then have an option to add something in. This is about sustainability, so it's about green awareness. I can tap on the arrows, again, thinking about the function of what does this do? Why are those triangles either side of that number? Does that help us kind of have access to those things? Tap Continue. Another nice animation that gives me some more information. And again, text on the page, highlighting what I need to do next. And then a page which you'll be familiar with in most applications that you see, this idea of this kind of slide along where you can move between different elements. And then again, in this page here, you can see some of that design where the buttons are along the bottom. So the research has been done into like, where do apps tend to have these different elements? And again, the touchable buttons mean that this moves across. So our very simple kind of design is just reformatted here, that at the bottom of every page, rather than just a home button, this one allows you to move between different elements of the application. Now, again, with your learners in the classroom, they would get so excited thinking about how they could build their favorite app and what inspiration can they take from how those apps work, and then see that they can bring it to life on their own devices as well. Okay, so let's take a look at that in the app that we're making then, because you can see here, this is one application. Currently we have 24 slides, but really they're just examples of just something moving or disappearing off of the page, and then those hyperlinks operating between them. So just had a question in the window. So this is Keynote. This is an app on the iPad that you can utilize, again, using those kind of touchscreen elements so that we're replicating an app. So Keynote on the iPad is how we're building this. So let's jump back to our basic design here. And we got this idea of, well, maybe having a look at someone else's app, let's change some of this. So I quite like the fact that on that app, they kind of had this at the bottom of every page. And this is the kind of reiteration stage. We made a basic app, and then we get some feedback, or in this case, I've just stolen someone else's ideas. So let's have a look at what that might look like instead. Because all we're doing is building on what we've currently built. I'm not having to start again. I'm just utilizing all of the things and just adapting it slightly. So let's just move these down. So now we have the same function as we had before, but we've got a completely different design. So this could be as a result of feedback from other students about, well, like, you know, I didn't want to have to tap on the home button each time because that actually looks a little bit dated. What I wanted was something which kind of allowed me to do this. And so now again, instead of having a home button, how we've iterated our design is I'm just going to copy each one of those, and I'm just going to paste them on every slide. So again, minimal work, but you can play around with those iterations. So again, that same kind of principle, which now means I don't need the home button anymore. So I can delete that off of my slide. And this is the type of thing that you would want from your students in the classroom. You know, you've designed something and it works, it's functional, but the feedback is, well, it looks a little bit boring or a little bit dated, and I don't like the home icon at the top. So how about you change it to something like this instead? So now we have that menu bar. And we could go even further and we could start to kind of build other elements into this, thinking about designing the page. And again, you'll have different students that really like to design things in different ways. And this is great as a collaborative activity for students, because you might have some students that work on the function and another student might work on the design, and another student might kind of collate all of the media that you want to put into this. So I'm just going to really basic design, just add this in. I have an arrange button here, so I can move this behind everything. So now I've got something sat on top of a background. So it looks a little bit nicer. Although my OCD is going to kick in a second because all of my icons aren't the same height. But I'll let it go just for now. Okay, so our function is still there. Our design is still there. Let's look at the next thing then, and let's make it look a little bit more interactive. At the moment, if I tap on the jumper or the t-shirt, it takes me to a page that's a little bit drab. Let's think about maybe doing some animations. So when you go to this page, something happens. Well, how about we go to this page, and instead of it being a small picture of a t-shirt, let's really introduce people to what this content is. In this case, yes, it might be that it's a clothing application or whatever. But let's now animate this. So it doesn't just sit there, it does something. I can do this in two ways. I can either tap on the shape itself and choose animate, and it gives me the animate options at the bottom. And again, if you're used to using things like Keynote or PowerPoint, it's just your transitions and animations that you can utilize. And you can have a build-in, so it can start off the screen and appear here, or I can have an action to something whilst it's already in situ. I'm going to choose an action, and I'm just going to change, I just want this to rotate maybe, just to give it something on the screen. And I can change the amount it rotates and the duration it rotates and all of those things in here if I want to play around with it. And I can test what this looks like. There we go. So I'll do that. And then I'm also going to add another element in here and maybe have it scale down to a different size. Let's just move that. Oops. There we go. And I'm going to move it on the screen as well. So let's move it up to here. So you'll see that I'm kind of building all those animations in, and then you can preview what that looks like. Obviously, to your heart's content, change things around. There we go. So if you tapped on that page, that was what happened. I'm not quite sure why my t-shirt would be sideways, but again, hopefully the feedback from fellow students would correct that. So again, have a play around with that in terms of the animations, because now we're thinking about Keynote as an application beyond a presentation. It's now our animation tool. It's now how we can make something look really, really interactive. I'll do something similar here with the jumper. Let's say that when we come on this page, the jumper is going to start off screen. This time I'm going to use the three dots up here just to show you another way to find it. Animate also exists here. And then I'll do build in on this one. So I'll have this maybe compress first. Maybe I'll put it on the page for this. And then add my action of, let's have this, I don't know, flip maybe. And again, lots of things that you can do here. And I know I'm showing kind of lots of different crazy things. Usually we would just tell our students to not just use every single animation that's available because it's actually quite distracting, but I just wanted to show you the range of things that you can do. That obviously comes down to that lesson and how you're sort of displaying this to students. So if I now play on this slide, there we go, my jumper comes in and then spins around on the page. So drawing attention to it, but not sort of overly distracting on the page. So again, just take a second, just have a play around with some of those things, just identify where they are on the page. And although we haven't got like a fully functional app with content, etc., hopefully you can see now the process of how we would build this application. And really, and already we've got 2 comments in the chat window there from Key Stage 3 ICT teachers. You can see this from an ICT point of view, but hopefully if you're not an ICT teacher, you'll also see that how this could be used in any subject where you might ask students to create something like a history presentation about the local area, or a geography presentation about another part of the world, or climate change or something, and how instead of taking that information and having it as a linear presentation, how could you use the same content that you've learned and then create something that could be used by somebody else to develop knowledge and understanding, because obviously the stealth teacher in us means that the students still need to learn the stuff to go into this. They still need the content, but the output is something that might be more engaging for some of those students. So massively cross-curricular learning opportunities here in terms of app design. So how do we get students to understand that coding or computational thinking is important in any walk of life, not just if you decide to go into ICT? Because actually, and you'll know this, that the ICT teachers on the call, lots of people that make apps these days aren't necessarily the ICT people. They're people that just had a great idea. And what this allows them to do is kind of develop that idea. And yes, you might then ultimately go to an app designer to make it, but you hold on to the whole design process. You don't wait for someone else to make an app that solves your problems. You design the app to solve the problems that you need to solve. Okay, so there we go. So let's have a look at some of this as a functioning app now. Tap on the go button, choose the jumper at the bottom, and then hopefully on that page, there we go, my jumper will appear and spin, and then I can go to the t-shirt page, and then that animation is going to appear. Now at the moment, I'm having to tap on the screen. So the final thing to just highlight is how do we turn this into something which is all automated? And that again is in our animation section. So if I tap on the three dots, go to animation, I've already built in my animations. So now I'm going to go to the three bars at the top here. And this is where I can automate everything. So rather than on tap, it's just going to go after the build, and just make sure you've got that in place. You can set delays, etc. And if I do that on the slide with the jumper as well, it's going to go after the first one. And again, that's going to go after the transition. So again, it's more like an automated process to come back in. And now if I play this time in the app setting, go back to go, tap on the jumper. My animation is there without me having to tap anything on the screen. So again, you can start to see how this can suddenly become something really, really interactive. Okay, just checking on the chat. So how did you get the item to scale down and then move into the corner? So it's just in this one, it's just a case of building those animations. So if I jump back on the t-shirt and go back into my animation, you'll notice at the bottom it says multiple here, and you can basically just keep adding different things in. So I had it rotate initially, and then I had it scale to a different size. And then I chose this last one here, which is motion path, which is where you see the red line, which is where you can choose where it goes to. Now there's so many additional things that you can do in here. Like it doesn't have to go in a straight line. It doesn't have to go, it can be a curved line. There's all sorts of things that you can do to change that motion path, which is great for doing animation if you're just using Keynote as an animation tool. But if you just want to add in an extra thing, you just tap on the plus. Like if I want that t-shirt to now kind of move to the other corner, it could drop down here. I'm not sure why it would, but just to kind of demonstrate this. And then I could rotate it back to being round the right way. And my whole process at the moment. But this last one, I'm going to rotate it so it actually goes the right way around. So again, there's lots and lots of things in here where you would be talking to students about, you know, how do they build these things? Because it is, again, it's that cause and effect. And, you know, if I do this, what is the result of that? So lots of problem solving that they can do into this. Not even sure what this looks like now. That hasn't moved anyway. But hopefully that's answered that question. So it's just that you kind of build this sequence here. So again, from a coding point of view, you've kind of got your idea here of building a sequence of commands. The commands form the sequence, and then the sequence is what you see on the screen. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so there we go. So that's the prototyping. If I jump back to that booklet, you'll see how that marries up with that design element here. So the students will have storyboarded it. The students then create their versions, and then they would obviously have that sort of shared amongst each other. And then finally, they would do their evaluation. The final thing to highlight in here is the accessibility. And accessibility is a really, really key thing to think about with students. Now, we've done all of this as a non-verbal, non-literacy based application. We're using icons and images. So hopefully this would be usable by anybody. But equally, we think about how this might be used by someone who didn't have the ability to see my application. So what could I do to change that? And that's when you challenge your students to think about the other tools available. So the power of being able to add in audio to the page, so that actually when a student or anybody using the application taps on an element, it speaks to them. And so you can build in that idea of voiceover, etc., to allow access. And that's kind of where you can extend things even further with students to get them to think about all of the different elements. Okay, so just in closing, and I want to leave some time for some questions as well, and there is a couple of questions in the chat window that I wanted to answer. All of this can be found on Apple Teacher. So if you go to Apple Teacher on the device, if I just type in at the top, Apple Teacher Learning Center, see mine pops up with this on the page. That first result you get is Apple Teacher. When you go into it, you don't need to sign in. It is great as a tool. If you're using iPad, there's so much more in here that you can do. But if you're just trying to find this resource, along this top bar here are current activities and bits of information. And we're looking in this inclusive app design activity. And if we go into that activity, all of the information you need to be able to run this session is available to you. So you have all of the what to do, how to go through those different steps, including the booklet to download here. And as we said at the start, the booklet, this one is for years 5 to 9, or designed for that kind of age range. And this booklet here is for years 10 and up. So again, just has a slightly different aspect and different level of kind of understanding built into it. So all of that content is there for you to utilize as well. I'll try and put that link actually into the chat window so you have access to it. And then I just wanted to leave some time. There we go, it's in the chat window now if you need access to that Apple Teacher. I just wanted to leave some time really for if there's any questions from anybody about how you would utilize this, or even sharing how you would use this. So we've had a couple of examples from Key Stage 3 ICT teachers. If anybody's got any other thoughts about how you might use this in your own classrooms, depending on the age range, depending on the curriculum area as well. So we'll just hold on, we've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody does have any questions. Yeah, brilliant. So idea there, design an app competition for Key Stage 3. Actually, if you there are some additional resources available through Apple around the whole idea of celebrating app design. And there are some additional resources that you can actually utilize, which do take that little bit further. So you'll see at the bottom here, this whole idea of showcasing apps. So you can go further with this. And so there are additional resources available for exactly that concept that you noted there. So which is why I always say Apple Teacher Learning Center is just so rich of full of resources for you to go that next step. So you'll notice here, this is kind of around this idea of app design. So once students have designed their app, how do you then showcase them? And how can you celebrate that? So exactly to that point of an app competition, I think that's a fantastic idea as well. And again, it's getting students to know that the work they create has a wider kind of appeal and other people can see it, because that's where you're going to get the feedback from. Okay, great. Well, if there's no further questions, I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining in the session today. Just again, to just highlight some of those things that we mentioned at the start of the session, please do contact JTRS about any of those things that we talked about. There's so many things that you can do with iPad in the classroom, coding just being one of them. Highlighting again that Apple Learning Institute, there are places still available for the November session. So if that's something you're keen on, again, get in touch with the guys and they'll be able to give you some information. Please do check out the Learning Inspired section of the website where you'll find this recording going forward, as well as so many other fantastic resources. That next upcoming Jamf webinar on the 4th of November, where you can register and find all about how Jamf is used to really help you organize things in the classroom. And then finally, just a reminder, if you are doing STEM activities in your school, JTRS has a great offer at the moment to get some 10% off purchases of any equipment that you might need to use for that. Thank you very much for joining in. I hope everybody has a pleasant evening and good luck with your coding and app design in your classroom.